When Lucita and I stayed at her compound, Maria Sandoza told us tales of Mexico City's more peculiar denizens. Always one for new avenues of discovery, my ears pricked when she mentioned a pack of blood brothers. This bloodline's often been connected to the Tremere Antitribu, or Spellbinders as Aristotle names them, and suffers decreasing numbers since the disappearance of its creators. I inquired with Maria as to the whereabouts of these Frankensteins, to which she informed me of a lucid one named Dr. Verona, who would be happy to meet me. Sadly, I didn't have the time back then to track down Verona, but a break from Russia is precisely what I needed right now.
Testing. Hello? Bueno. So this is un pequeño recorder, beckett? I lost my last one in a chest cavity, man. I'll make good use of yours, though. Trust me. I see that it's almost full. It will provide good listening while I sleep el sueño eterno de la justicia. How you doing down there, man? I bet it's difficult to talk with a spike straight through your heart, eh? I'm addressing you because I know you can hear me when you're staked. I've done hundreds of tests. Hey! Quiet! You know, Madre always told me I had an untidy bedroom, man. And I guess you didn't count on meeting a gestalt angel. We were told you were coming, man. And now you're here with me. There you go. That's you all opened up. Veamos que esta paisado ahí. Not much, eh? You know, I do tag you as Verona de Tal, but it doesn't really matter what I call you, man. Hey! Stop squirming, man! Now what the fuck was I saying? You know the blessed choir, man? We're not able to create children on our own. Not the natural way with the fangs and the blood. God forbids it. Since Madre went back to Teotihuacan and never came back, we were forced to innovate. Puede sentir ese pendejo? That was the sound of your right foot being cut through the ankle. You know, feet amuse me, man. We went to un universidad when they realized Ma wasn't coming back. All blood brothers from Mexico City. We tried to get in, and we lost a good number, man. It was a mess. When we finally got inside and found the remains of Madre, we cried, man. We cried, tore our clothes, merged back over and over. How could we have more brothers and sisters without Madre, man? I found a book about us, man. One was by... Hey! Baz! Oh, and the book was by Lorenzo Torquemada, a toreador anti-tribu from Uruguay. He claims in his text to be el instigador de nuestra creación. I traced Torquemada's name in other works, man. I found an intriguing ritual, and I've been practicing on countless bodies over and over. I even got a couple right once or twice. Listen, I'm gonna make you into one of us, Fulano de Tal. I'll even let you pick your own name. The brothers of the choir will engage your stumps, share your blood. We'll all take a part of you, and you will take a piece of each of us, man. Now, let's move that spike an inch to the
I've never had to flee while lacking a foot and an arm before, with my gray guts hanging out. But, as the transcript shows, Verona gave me a warm welcome.
Blood brothers, also known as Frankensteins, are almost, if not entirely, extinct. And judging by the recording you just heard, that's certainly for the better. If you have a surface familiarity with blood brothers, then you might already know the following. At their peak, Blood Brothers were nothing more than experimental shock troops and soldiers, with their identities entirely stripped away during the creation process. Most are hopelessly idiotic and helplessly loyal to the Sabbat, and to their makers by design. To the Sabbat and the creators of the bloodline, a perfect circle of Blood Brothers is one without any sense of individuality. A pack of wolves taken and molded to appear and act as one savage hive mind, or occasional protoplasmic mass, hopelessly loyal to their masters and creators. Their origins are almost entirely unknown, though the ritual process of creating Blood Brothers was established sometime within the last several hundred years, the 18th century or so at the latest, and was a result of experimental collaborations between Sabbat-aligned anti-tribu sorcerers of Clan Tzimisce and Tremere. Unlike other artificially created bloodlines, such as the Gargoyles, there doesn't seem to be a single moment in time that we can point to as the moment Blood Brothers were invented. And to make things worse, the original ritual used to create the original Blood Brothers is, like most names and faces of the Tremere anti-tribu themselves, destroyed and forgotten to time. Blood Brothers were soldiers, made to serve their masters without question, and now the masters are gone, and there's almost no way for the Blood Brothers to create more of their own. The name of Frankenstein should start to make sense. And you might be thinking, well, the Blood Brothers do have a method of reproduction, like basically any other vampiric bloodline, and that's by the way of the embrace, of course. Even some gargoyles can embrace, terrifying as that thought is. Well, that's the thing when it comes to our dear Frankensteins. Despite being considered a bloodline, the Blood Brothers can't actually perform the embrace. They aren't even created via the embrace. And that's because Blood Brothers, while they are a vampiric bloodline, are not kindred. To most Tremere, it can be argued that the clan's role in the creation and enslavement of the Gargoyle bloodline stands as one of, if not the greatest mistakes ever committed by their clan. To the Tremere anti-tribu, their greatest mistake was simply allowing the Gargoyles to remain capable of the embrace. When those Tremere created the first of the Frankenstein bloodline, that mistake would not be made again. The Blood Brothers' vampiric infertility, among other factors surrounding their creation, like the lack of an embrace, causes all sorts of questions to arise when it comes to the exact nature of their existence. The primary one being, if Blood Brothers aren't kindred because they're not created via clan embrace, then just what the hell are they? Well, for now I'm gonna put it this way. If the Gargoyles were the Tremere's solution to the idea of many becoming one, Blood Brothers are the Tremere and Tzimisce anti-tribu's solution to the opposite though equally cursed idea of one becoming many. And how does one become many? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the exact process is lost to us now. Actually, everything I'm talking about in this video doesn't even exist anymore in the game's current V5 timeline as of the recording of this video. Nothing I'm about to say exists in V5, for the Blood Brothers have been condensed into a small cube of text in the newest Sabbat book. Anyway, here's what we know. According to most sources, Blood Brothers are created in groups of 3 to 10 victims. These groups are known as circles. If there's a Tzimisce present, vicissitude is used to flesh sculpt each victim's face and bodies such that each Blood Brother appears identical to each other. Sometimes they're sculpted to resemble a single victim of the circle, usually the most capable or important victim. Other times, the victims are sculpted into the seemingly identical average of one another. Then, something happens and the results are permanent. A circle of Blood Brothers is born. Most circles regress to a near idiotic mental state, and are generally incapable of advanced creativity or trickery, unless they're given direct and immediate orders and assistance. These circles are simply blood-bonded, put on guard duty, or sent out on a suicide mission, and that's that. They're a pack of dogs fanatically loyal to each other and their owner. Their thoughts rarely exceeded more than one word. With that in mind, many Sabbat in the past have been known to enhance the terror of their violent vampire hodors by dressing them up as skinheads and white supremacists, all to increase the terror caused by their presence, and because the Sabbat simply found it hilarious. Some circles either last long enough or are otherwise allowed to retain their intelligence and creativity, and are entirely capable of forming their own thoughts and sentences, though they will remain absolutely loyal to their circle, owners, and creators. Very select few are allowed to retain their own free will and are treated as equals among others within their Sabbat diocese. though I use the term free will lightly, as the circle will always remain fanatically devoted to itself. Some of these circles have actually partook of the Auctoritas Vitae and passed successfully, meaning there were, at times, blood brothers considered worthy among the chosen of Cain. But I'll keep it real. Trying to convince any powerful Sabbat that a blood brother is an equal among a child of Cain will only ever result in that circle of blood brothers being summarily executed in a manner of humiliation or indifference. Those true Sabbat will step forth and remind all those foolish enough to consider this circle as one of their own that the blood brothers are, at their core, tools to be used. These ancient, powerful children of Cain would remind everyone that the Sabbat were created of the embrace of Cain's blood, that they are harbingers of Cain's power, and that they herald their Dark Father's return to his throne of basalt to bring forth a new era defined by vampiric judgment and darkness. They will look upon the Tzimisce and Tremere anti-tribu cultists and their so-called equals, a circle of giggling, idiotic vampire skinhead hodors, who are not even created via the embrace, nor can they perform the embrace. A mutant monstrosity obsessed with erasing any forms of personal individuality to look, act, and belong to its own predisposed collective circle. A collective where individuality is met with beatings if the change itself is not assimilated into said collective. A circle of monsters who have haven standards lower than the lowest Nosferatu. You can take a circle of blood brothers and put them in the most putrid, feculent, fecund slop hole in all of Vampire the Masquerade. I'm of course talking about Fire's ass, and the blood brothers will smile and say, Hodor. Those true Sabbat staring upon this disgusting amorphous mass they are supposed to call equal would pause and think for a moment as to how to properly handle this pathetic misjudgment. In their ancient wisdom, these children of Cain would immediately have these anti-tribu sorcerers perform the Blood Brothers' creation rituals upon themselves, which shouldn't be a problem, for they see the Blood Brothers as equals. These ancient Sabbat would, in their infinite wisdom as true children of Cain, force this circle to watch as they kill off each member one after the other until only one lonely blood brother remains. Perhaps the former Tremere anti-tribu who created this damnable circle in the first place. He would then be taken, sealed into a coffin, and dumped into the Mariana Trench, where he can spend an eternity as a lonely blood brother without brothers, and as a once Tremere anti-tribu who had the hubris to claim that his pet shock trooper had any purpose in the world beyond being a pet shock trooper. And to most, that would be the end of that as far as the topic of blood brothers is concerned. They were simply a now-defunct test weapon and artificial undead that can't even be created on a mass scale without risk of exposure to Camarilla-aligned Tremere, who have long wished to reverse engineer the Frankensteins and uncover the means of the creation. As of tonight, the Blood Brothers are almost certainly extinct. Even the very idea of them, the strange pseudo-vampiric non-kindred, continues to diminish. Some only treat the Blood Brothers as legends and nothing more. Yet for those who know, they will tell you that the Blood Brothers were simply a bad idea that has been discarded in favor of better methods of experimental vampiric warfare. No wonder they don't exist in V5, I mean, how could they? Well, if this was any other RPG universe, like Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, I could probably end the video here, but we're talking about the World of Darkness before 5th edition. We're only scratching the surface. Real quick. If you haven't watched the Bruja video, I'm just going to put it plainly, get your ass over there and watch it, and then come back, because I'm going to use this chapter as a sort of excuse to continue where we left off. But I promise, it ties into the Blood Brothers, so just bear with me. In 1993, White Wolf Publishing released a seriously dope supplement for Chicago by Night 2nd edition called Under a Blood Red Moon. Under a Blood Red Moon was simply a crossover for both Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse, which covers events that happens concurrent to Chicago by Night itself. Though, keep in mind this book is primarily focused on the Werewolf the Apocalypse half of the equation. Or what I mean by that is, it is a werewolf-centric book that also includes steps for players who wish to play as vampires, Camarilla, and Sabbat aligned. Anyway, Under a Blood Red Moon starts with a prequel chapter to the events of Chicago by Night 2nd edition, all of which happens in 1993. The events during and surrounding the prequel look something like this, and keep in mind I'm generalizing the shit out of it. In 1993, a faction of Sabbat manipulates, dominates, works with, or otherwise forces a bunch of shapeshifters, some of which are Black Spiral Dancers and others Bone Gnawers, into attacking Chicago's infamous Succubus Club. The Succubus Club, if you haven't already heard of it, is an absolutely legendary nightclub within the Vampire the Masquerade universe that is popular among both the living and the dead, which was originally constructed in Chicago during the early 80s by the former Prince of Chicago, Loden. So who's Loden? Well, we can get into it later, but for now, let me just say he was perhaps one of, if not the most infamous Camarilla princes of the West of Clan Venture to have ever ruled. And he was responsible for such silliness like the embracing of Al Capone, a story for the Chicago by Night video. Anyway, Loden constructs the Succubus Club in the early 80s with the help of one little shit named Prius. Yes, that Prius. Prius, the thousands-year-old ghoul to none other than Helena, who was to be safely hidden underneath the Succubus Club so that, when she awoke from her torpid state, she could be in a place where she could feed and learn about the freaky future of the 90s she found herself in. You see, Helena had been stuck in torpor for the last century or so, after her latest battle with Menela in the 1800s, which resulted in both Methuselahs falling into torpor. The battle itself took place during the Battle of Fort Dearborn, which is, again, another thing I'll elaborate on the Chicago by Night video. The battle took place on the grounds that would, roughly 15 years after the fight, be called Chicago. And this leads to Prius working with the then Prince Loden to construct the Succubus Club, all of which was secretly done for Prius's beloved Helena, a place to keep her safe. Oh, and of course, despite the two Methuselahs remaining in torpor, you know for damn sure Menela and Helena waged their proxy war from afar between one another thanks to their all-powerful disciplines. Prius's plan regarding the Succubus Club was successful, and Helena would awaken from her torpor in 1990, where she would begin to study and learn of her new world prior to the events of Chicago by Night in 1993. You still with me? Oh, and prior to Menela and Helena's battle at Fort Dearborn, Menela had established himself as a sort of distant, wise, godly figure among the many, many Native American populations of the region. And he even garnered a sort of respect among the many, many more werewolves that were all over it. Even Menela's own name would fall out of history for a time, and he would become a sort of enigmatic figure remembered simply as Pale Wolf. When Pale Wolf, you know what, we'll save it for the Chicago by Night vid. So what does all this have to do with a bunch of Sabbat using and abusing werewolves, many of which respected those like Pale Wolf Menela, into attacking the Succubus Club in 1993? Well, you see, the Sabbat staged this attack in such a way that made Helena think the attack was caused by Menela. And while the Sabbat would claim that that was part of their master scheme, they genuinely had no idea that the Succubus Club was a secret haven for friggin' Helena of all kindred. They just targeted the Succubus Club because it was the premier vampire nightclub. And mind you, at this point in time, Helena is simply posing as a completely harmless, though ridiculously beautiful Toreador neonate named Portia. So Portia, Helena, in response to the attack on her Succubus Club, manipulates the otherwise indifferent Prince Loden into calling a blood hunt against any and all lupines of the region, thus causing all sorts of shit to spiral out of control, leading to the events of Chicago by Night 1993. All of this was done to keep the Camarilla distracted, thus allowing the pack of Sabbat instigators to break into the domain of Chicago, establish their diocese, and expand their power. One of the instigators of the attack, an old and relatively powerful and influential Sabbat named Philippe Rigaud, I'm just gonna call him Rigaud, uses his contacts with the Sabbat to call in all sorts of favors, weapons, and resources to strengthen his arsenal to better set the stage for his conquest of Chicago. Funny enough, this is how any Sabbat-aligned players connect with Rigaud throughout the Chronicle. And to elaborate on that, when Sabbat players meet Rigaud and his pack, which happens after going through a separate series of events, Rigaud gives each player a Rolex watch, everybody socializes, and all drink from the same strung-up, greasy, bald, fat owner of the store that they're all staying in. Everything is cool. Yet among the rest of Rigaud's pack, which are present throughout the encounter, are 5 blood brothers belonging to a circle known as Circle Number 7. Oh, and before we get into Circle Number 7, I just wanted to mention that the following night, the players are told to meet Regard at a friggin' McDonald's play place at 8 p.m., where at the McDonald's play place, a bunch of scary-ass vampires would wait until 4 black spiral dancers show up, one in a trench coat with a shotgun, no, I'm not kidding, enters the play place, and then they discuss the attack that's to be staged against the Succubus Club, aka Portia, aka Helena's stomping grounds. And I don't know why, but something about this is made even funnier to me because the current version of Vampire the Masquerade, V5, will actually not entertain the idea of Sabbat players being Sabbat players because the Sabbat are too extreme or something. Meanwhile, 1993 Trenchcoat Death Wolf Mafia pulls up at the play place to talk terrorism with the vampires. Where's Rudy when you need him? Anyway, Circle Number 7. If blood brothers aren't kindred, then just what the hell are they? Well, perhaps the blood brothers of Circle Number 7 can bring us some insight. These blood brothers are none other than Jerry, Terry, Barry, Larry, and Tom. Jerry is the last remaining most intelligent member of Circle Number 7, thus making him the de facto leader of it. Funny enough, Jerry was one of the first blood brothers ever created, meaning his creation was in one of those East European castles held by the Tzimisce and Tremere anti-tribu some couple hundred years ago, where he was ritualistically experimented on and artificially re-embraced into a blood brother pseudo-vampire of the 8th generation. And Jerry ain't no pushover either, as he went on to acquire a wide range of vampiric disciplines from animalism to celerity and even dominate, terrifying as that thought is. And he also possesses the maximum number of dots in the Blood Brothers' own unique clan discipline, known as Sanguinus, which we will talk about soon enough. Jerry was also one of those extremely few Blood Brothers that actually knew how to create and replicate more Frankensteins of his own, though the book, naturally, does not elaborate on the creation process itself. On that note, the other members of the then current Circle Number 7, the current as of the time of Under a Blood Red Moon, Terry, Barry, Larry, and Tom, were all created during Jerry's time in America in the lead-ups of the Chronicle itself. Something that hardly matters at this point because Jerry and the rest of Circle Number 7 most certainly died during the events of Blood Red Moon, if not Chicago by Night itself. And unfortunately, we don't have any memories of Jerry the Frankenstein's past, as all Blood Brothers lose their memory upon their creation, which I'm just gonna say now is certainly for the better. Terry was the first recruit of Jerry, who was also a woman, meaning Terry is a blood sister as opposed to a blood brother. Which is funny because prior to her creation, the Sabbat overseeing Circle Number 7, Jerry specifically, was actually kind of freaked out about Jerry converting a woman, as they thought it could cause some unseen adverse effect to occur. Which is also funny to me, like how the hell do you go 100+ years never even trying to create a woman? Okay, anyway. Luckily, and I do use that word lightly, the result of Terry's creation was no different than the creation of any other blood brother. Oh, and by the way, before Jerry recruited Terry, she was just some random employee at some random convenience store or gas station or something. So respect to Jerry the Frankenstein for snatching himself a bride, I guess. And good thing, if you can call it that, he chose Terry because she actually develops the disciplines of chemistry, which I will for now generalize as vampire illusion magic, alongside dominate and celerity, and like, my god, dude, just Terry and Jerry are scary as hell by themselves, without even acknowledging the fact that there's like 3 more of them, and they all possess Sanguinus, which again we'll get to. But anyway, let's get through the rest of the list. Barry was the recruit that came after Terry, and was a former professional wrestler abducted after the conclusion of the man's last match. He is the blood brother of Circle 7, specifically known for loving and therefore reveling in the powers granted by the curse of vampirism. And he possesses friggin' vicissitude, among other disciplines that, blood brothers have absolutely no right to have. Larry, while not the wisest, is the next and most human of all Circle Number 7. Yet, despite showing more humanity than the average Frankenstein, he still hopes to create a circle of his own. Then, there's Tom, the final member of Circle Number 7, who was not liked by anyone. Jerry, nor any of his brothers and sisters wanted Tom. He was simply the replacement for the now destroyed Harry, and is easily the outcast of Circle 7. Tom, nor anybody has any clue of Tom's history before or during his time in other circles. He doesn't even have any good disciplines, like fuck you, Tom. Circle number 7's role in the story of Under a Blood Red Moon is virtually non-existent. At worst, the Circle simply appears during the occasional random encounter for non-Sabbat players to fight, and the Haven itself was a secret, sleazy room hidden deep within the sewers of Chicago, which was covered in blood, had a busted TV, couch, and other nasty crackhead furniture. There was also one of those Dexter-style kill tables with buckles and straps, which may have been the table Jerry used to perform his lost art of Frankenstein replication. At some point in time, non-Sabbat players will be sent to Circle number 7's Haven, the room I just described, in order to destroy them. When they spend too much time in the Circle 7's Haven, the members of the Circle themselves appear in the doorway, the only entrance and exit to the room, then use their signature clan discipline of Sanguinus to meld into a fleshy block and mass, one giant necromorph thing that blocks off the doorway, thus engaging in combat, which I suppose is a good time to talk about our next clue that might lead us to discover just what the hell Blood Brothers really are. I'm talking specifically about their clan discipline, Sanguinus. Some believe that a kindred's supernatural disciplines are not only representative of that vampire's inner beast, but they are ultimately tools solely intended on keeping that beast alive. Disciplines are tools of self-preservation, which is pretty obvious when it comes to disciplines like fortitude or obfuscate, and debatable when it comes to others. But you'd be hard-pressed to find a discipline that encapsulates the idea of self-preservation as well as the disgustingly vile art of Sanguinus. I do mean it when I say disgusting, as any mortals that just witness advanced usage of Sanguinus have to succeed a dice check just to keep themselves from giving in to their newfound fits of nausea. You see, Sanguinus is a distant relative of vicissitude, and it allows the Frankensteins to synchronize and allocate various parts of their mind, flesh, and soul to their fellow blood brothers. While all vampires are stuck using their vitae to heal themselves, Sanguinus allows brothers to use their own vitae to remotely heal another member of their circle. Later stages of Sanguinus allows the Frankenstein to donate entire limbs and appendages in much the same way. You could be running from Circle number 7, just for all but Jerry to suddenly lose their legs and start crawling after you, while Jerry himself sprouts 4 additional legs to better catch you. Eyes, fingers, organs, heads, literally anything on the Frankenstein's body becomes a tool for other Frankensteins to utilize. I'll put it this way, it only takes 3 blood brothers to create some many-eyed, many-mouthed, and many-limbed creature from hell, all thanks to Sanguinus too. But terrifyingly enough, according to the 3rd rank of Sanguinus, known as Gestalt, the Blood Brothers finally develop what their creator seemingly intended Sanguinus to be, a hive mind-based discipline. According to V20, Gestalt allows the Frankensteins to telepathically synchronize their mad thoughts in unison, lend their skills the same way they lend their extremities, and develop greater resistances to disciplines like Dominate and Presence. So, if one Frankenstein is proficient with hacking or acting human, all of them might as well be. If you rewatch the Circle 7 chapter, the last chapter, some of Jerry's choices in brothers and sisters should start to make sense. Each member of Circle number 7, from their general normality to usage of specific disciplines, were all chosen because they specialize in something no other member really does well. Jerry basically assembled the friggin' pseudo-vampire Hodor Justice League, with the added benefit that they're all subject to whichever members have the highest levels in Sanguinus. And now that we've hit levels of strange I didn't even think possible, let's recap what we've learned about the Blood Brothers so far. So, Blood Brothers only existed for like 300 measly years or so at most. They were created by bygone Tzimisce and Tremere Antitribu. Most are kept stupid because they were experimental weapons, while others earn or otherwise retain their intelligence. They are not created via embrace and cannot create blood bonds. Pretty much nobody knows how they were created, and anybody who does know isn't around to share the process anymore. Because of their bizarre creation and nature, lack of standard vampire creation, and current record holder as the shortest-lived bloodline perhaps ever, almost everybody calls them pseudo-vampires and not real kindred. So, what are they then? Wait, what was that thing I said forever ago? If the gargoyles were the Tremere's solution to the idea of many becoming one, Blood Brothers are the Tremere and Tzimisce Antitribu's solution to the opposite though equally cursed idea of one becoming many. One becoming many. One vampire, many bodies. Let's read the 4th level of Sanguinus, known as the Walk of Cain, directly from Vampire the Masquerade V20. The sorcerer's theory behind the Blood Brothers reads like a philosophical treatise on the nature of individuality, free will, and hematology. The Frankensteins are not a group of vampires, but are one vampire in several bodies. Or so goes the theory. Well, there it is. The answer really was that simple after all. I get it now. Blood Brothers are the results of performing the embrace on many people at once. One vampire, several bodies. Thanks for what? Wait, hang on. The paragraph keeps going. The Frankensteins are not a group of vampires, but are one vampire in several bodies. Or so goes the theory. As such, any of the characteristics must be viewed as a continuum. They are not individually 12th, 11th, and 13th generation, for example, but they are collectively 9th generation at any given time. While the metaphysics of this kind of thinking makes most vampires' heads ache, there seems to be something to it. A blood brother can draw strength from his circle, lowering his generation to allow for greater feats of vitae expenditure. Get the fuck out of here. Yeah, sure, okay. Big deal. The Walk of Cain confirms the Blood Brothers are an attempt at one embrace across multiple bodies. Cool. But you're telling me the Walk of Cain itself allows the Blood Brother to loan one step of their generation to another Blood Brother? Wait, so Jerry from Circle 7 is an 8th generation Blood Brother with Sanguinus 5. He knows the Walk of Cain. And there are 4 other members of Circle number 7. Jerry can use the Walk of Cain to borrow one generation from the rest of Circle number 7 and ascend all the way up to 4th generation. Jerry could become a Methuselah. We still haven't solved the mystery. Sure, Blood Brothers are supposed to be the result of one artificial embrace across many bodies, many victims, but that still doesn't answer the question, does it? Like, what are they? What are the Blood Brothers? Well, I suppose we'll have to look a little deeper. The answer must lie within the elusive ritual that leads to the creation of a Blood Brother itself. I mean, it has to, right? In 1994, 1 year after Under a Blood Red Moon was published, White Wolf released a module called The Kindred Most Wanted, which is funny because the vampire depicted on the front isn't actually a kindred, depending on who you ask, of course. And that's because this vampire, the topic of our next deep dive, is a blood brother named Angelo, who belongs to a circle known as the Other Ones. In addition to being a blood brother, Angelo was, during his time, an anathema. An anathema is simply the nickname of someone put on the Camarilla's most wanted list, before the Red List itself became an official decree. So, if it isn't obvious already, the book called The Kindred Most Wanted is about the Camarilla's then current list of anathema like Angelo. In 1966, as Los Angeles was being torn apart during the Sunset Strip riots, a pack of nomadic Sabbat witnessed a mortal gang on a path of destruction, torching every building in their wake. The leader of the arsonist gang was a mortal named Angelo, who was strung out on PCP, cocaine, meth, pretty much everything he could inject, shoot up, or snort, or whatever. And the reason for this methed out rampage was because Angelo's little brother had recently died at the hands of a rival gang. So, this night was going to be Angelo's last night on this earth, one defined by destruction and enough drugs to quite literally kill 12 men. As Angelo danced among and around a building that he set on fire, waiting for it to fall down on top of him, the Sabbat following his gang jumped into the fires and began dancing with Angelo. Well, to be more specific, they actually jump in with Angelo and perform the Octoritas Rite known as the Fire Dance. But anyway, the rest of Angelo's gang, naturally, flees in terror, while Angelo is just laughing and throwing coals at these vampires, who recoil in terror and immediately turn around and try to laugh and throw coals back. It was then that they knew Angelo would be a perfect candidate for the embrace, yet they didn't do it in the smoldering building. See, there were brief moments of lucidity during Angelo's high. In one lapse of clarity, Angelo realized he wasn't dancing in the flaming building anymore, but instead dancing in a cemetery surrounded by the Sabbat. In another lapse, he realized his clothes had either been burned or ripped off during the dance. Every time one of the vampires approached, a new cut appeared on Angelo's body. Soon, Angelo realized he was no longer dancing, but running and fighting in terror. When the faces of Angelo's friends and family appeared to comfort the isolated man, another Another lapse of clarity would wash over him, and the faces would instead reveal themselves to be the faces of the Sabbat undead licking up the blood from the cuts that covered the man's body. The more blood the vampires took, the more sober and horrified Angelo became. And so, be it the drugs or the anemia, running was soon out of the question. Yet, funny enough, the Sabbat that drank Angelo's blood got completely high out of their damn minds. Some falling into fits of laughter in open graves, and others writing their names in blood on Angelo's own body like graffiti. They opened their wrists and fed Angelo their blood, thus embracing him. Yet, before these drugged-out Sabbat could drag Angelo away to blood bond or otherwise capture and convert him to the cause, Angelo used his newfound vampirism to get the hell out of there. The Sabbat that brought the Skirnapod Angelo would stay so high off of his blood that the following sunrise killed every single one of them. All of this happened on the night of Angelo's 18th birthday. And if you thought that was bad, it gets worse. Of all the places the young vampire Angelo could try to hide out, he chooses an abandoned warehouse. Which, fair enough, an abandoned warehouse does seem like a perfectly good choice, but here's a little tip for you when it comes to surviving the night. If it looks haunted, it probably is. And if the place looks like prime real estate for a vampire to hide out in, it's probably already claimed by one. Or in Angelo's case, many. The warehouse was a gathering place for several Sabbat ghouls that were collecting staked caitiffs and other low-generation vampires that their Tzimisce and Tremere Antitribu sorcerers wanted to perform a little experiment on. You already know where this is going. They easily spotted and took down, then staked the young Angelo and shipped him off alongside the rest of his brothers-to-be. And despite Angelo's paralysis from being staked, he felt everything. The warping of his flesh, the sensation of old Tremere hands sliding their blood down his gullet. Angelo could hear the thoughts through the never-ending screams of his brothers-to-be, subjected to the same ritual procedure as him. During the entire process, visions of his little brother would appear in his mind, though Angelo was incapable of helping him, and the visage of his mortal brother began to shift and morph into Angelo's new brothers. The ritual was successful, and all involved, Angelo included, were successfully converted into blood brothers. Yet their training was far from over. The Tzimisce handlers of Angelo's circle subjected them all to tests that pushed them to the extremes of their endurance. Yet it was only Angelo who persevered effectively. Even the other members of the circle grew to resent Angelo partially, for he was seemingly granted only blessings as a blood brother. Angelo became the strongest, fastest, most handsome son of a bitch in the circle, that the rest of his circle's resentment would eventually grow into repulsion, and then eventually amazement. Perhaps it was the rage caused by losing Angelo's brother, fueled by the curse of undeath that brought Angelo this unforeseen power. And when the Tzimisce attempted to teach the circle their trademark discipline of sanguinus, none of them would operate or listen or act without Angelo's presence. It almost seemed like the rest of the circle had begun to share in Angelo's hatred. So, to cut the long story short, the creators of Angelo's circle stake and contain all other members of the circle in meat lockers in order to properly condition and further their experimentation on the unruly Angelo himself. The sorcerers are basically thinking, shit, maybe if we put Angelo through the creation process again, we'll make even more blood brothers just as strong and capable as he is. Unfortunately, the prodigal Frankenstein pretty much refused to entertain the sorcerers without his brothers with him. So one night, when one of the sorcerers attempts to use Dominate in order to subdue Angelo, he breaks out into an all-out rage that leads him completely ripping apart one of the sorcerers, releasing his circle and escaping to the night. The Tzimisce and Tremere sorcerers, upon returning to their base after looking for Angelo and his circle, were terrified to find that Angelo and his circle, the other ones, didn't actually leave at all. They amalgamated into a massive ball of angry flesh hidden on the ceiling that basically dropped down and annihilated everyone and everything in there until only Angelo and his circle remained. The rest of the place was burned to the ground, as is custom to Angelo's character. And thus began Angelo's short-lived, though infamous journey into undeath, where the forever enraged Angelo fought and killed basically anybody that didn't look like his real or blood brothers, until his final death 33 years later in 1999. And I do mean it when I say infamous. Angelo had all sorts of rumors surrounding him during his time. Many thought he was a Tzimisce that actually learned how to duplicate himself, while others thought he was in a constant state of frenzy at all times. Some unnamed Tremere even believed that Angelo was the unliving embodiment of the kindred's next step in evolution. But the truth is, Angelo was nothing more than a tragic story with a sad ending. So what's the takeaway for us? Well, thanks to that story, we now know that the creation of a Frankenstein involves a process that's similar to the embrace, except it also involves connecting a bunch of humans together such that they form a singular bloodstream. Then they're fed the blood of the sorcerer, thus resulting, perhaps, in the victims becoming artificially re-embraced into blood brothers. But there has to be more to this process, of course, otherwise anybody would be able to create a circle of Frankensteins. In 2002, White Wolf released Mexico City by Night. In it, among a plethora of other absolutely terrifying vampires that inhabits Mexico, are the Hungry Sisters, or las Hermanas Hambrientas, a circle of blood brothers, or sisters, solely composed of women. You see, in 1999, or other sources claim 1998, a cataclysmic event occurred during a gathering of Tremere anti-tribu within their Mexico City chantry that resulted in the near extermination of the entirety of the clan, much to the world's benefit. That's actually the primary reason the creation ritual of the Frankensteins disappeared in the first place. The knowledge was lost in the destruction that claimed the rest of the Tremere anti-tribu. And I'll have to save the mysterious events surrounding the annihilation of the Tremere anti-tribu of House Goratrix for, the Tremere video itself, but at least know that. Anyway, after the reckoning that befell the chantry, which itself was lost somewhere within Mexico City, countless artifacts and experiments were left behind. These artifacts and grimoires and all other forms of horrific knowledge accumulated by the Tremere tribu, did I say Tremere tribu? Never mind, were claimed by other vampires or otherwise lost. The experiments themselves ran free. The Hungry Sisters were among those experiments. You see, while all other anti-tribu long wrote off the Blood Brothers as simply experimental weapons, others actively tried to improve on the design. This was the case for one Elena Mendoza Vasquez, one of the sorcerers that vanished in 1999 with the rest of the chantry. Luckily for us, her research notes were left behind, and they tell one hell of a story. Elena was attempting to design a circle of Frankensteins that was capable of performing a type of artificial embrace that resulted in the creation of another blood brother, and she would have total control over the circle's ability to perform this embrace, thus making her a sort of maternal figure to be worshipped by the circle. Elena's notes outlined countless lives that were lost during her attempts at creating this perfect circle, until she eventually succeeded. And while we don't have the notes on how she, of course, created the Frankenstein itself, her notes did describe how she successfully developed her variation of it. The process involves a female Frankenstein to engage in a mutual feeding with a chosen victim. By that I mean the two bite and drink of each other's blood in a meditative process that causes the blood of both beings to blend and flow together in one symbiotic connection. The symbiosis is maintained anywhere from 3 to 10 nights, to which both beings will rise and the process is complete. During this process, the victim slowly transforms into her sire, to a point that only her generation differentiates her. Unfortunately, Elena vanished before this process could be tempered, meaning only roughly 1 in 10 women survived the ordeal and successfully become artificially re-embraced. During Elena's attempts, most simply died during the process, while others rose from undeath as a wight, permanently lost in their state of wassail. Even if the process was successful, there is one horrible downside for the newly created Frankensteinette. Due to whatever alterations in blood potency made by Elena, the resulting blood sister possesses a metabolism just over 10 times that of a normal vampire. Literally. In order to properly complete her transformation, the blood sister will have to kill and drink the blood of 10 to 12 mortals before finally regaining her composure, hence the name Hungry Sister. And after the Tremere anti-tribu vanished, as other vampires scavenged the remains of the abandoned chantry, one single Hungry Sister escaped her containment and fled into the night. In the span of 2 years, this single Hermana Hambrienta replicated herself, and then those replicants replicated until upwards of 20 Hungry Sisters existed, massacring entire towns to satiate their never-ending hunger. They earned a reputation across Mexico City and neighboring regions as ghosts and harbingers of doom, so terrific that mortal men and women began to serve them and sacrifice their fellow man in order to survive their presence. Their nests would be filled with bones and gristle, and their terror would only persist for a handful of years before the local Sabbat bishop purged them all for the inherent risk caused by their existence. And now, Las Hermanas Hambrientas, like Angelos and the other ones, or Circle Number 7, are all gone. The recording you heard play at the beginning of this video comes from Beckett's Jihad Diary, which might be one of, if not the greatest supplements ever released for Vampire the Masquerade. And in essence, it's the diary belonging to our good old pal Beckett, who documents his travels around the world, advancing the meta plot of Vampire the Masquerade into the modern nights, since most of the VTM lore surrounds the late 90s and early 2000s. The book itself, if I recall correctly, takes place in 2004, but I digress. As I mentioned, the recording that played at the beginning of this video was intended to be a meeting between Beckett and one of the last remaining blood brothers that ever existed, an infamous independent serial killer named Dr. Verona. Dr. Verona belonged to a circle known as the Blessed Choir, which itself is thought to be a bit of a myth, as no one has ever really seen the other members of the circle since the destruction of the chantry. Most have only ever seen Verona himself. And Verona is described as grotesquely fat and covered in swollen, misshapen lumps and bulges. He's described as a creature wearing a vampire's bag of skin, more so than just being a fat vampire. Regardless, Beckett jumps at the chance to speak to an actual blood brother, as speaking to him might also allow Beckett to get closer to the location of the mysterious abandoned chantry that went off the record with the rest of the Tremere anti-tribu in '99. However, rather than speak to Beckett like a normal-ass vampire, Verona successfully overpowers and stakes Beckett with the intention of turning him into a blood brother using his own specialized ritual process. One terrifying detail shared by Beckett later on is that the only reason he was so easily overpowered by Verona is because he swears that not just one, but many pairs of arms emerged from Verona's body upon him grabbing Beckett, but I digress. In the recording, while Verona goes all Hannibal Lecter on Beckett, Verona shares that back in the 90s, he and his circle raided the abandoned chantry of the anti-tribu after its traumatizing destruction. There, Verona found a grimoire written by one Lorenzo Torquemada, which outlined his own methods and steps required to create a blood brother. And of course, while we don't know much about the steps outlined by Lorenzo himself, we do know the process is similar to the creation of a blood sister. Actually, who's to say Elena, the creator of the Hungry Sisters, isn't the very same vampire that created Verona? I mean, we only ever hear Verona refer to his creator as one Madre Diolinda. Anyway, as Verona reveals in the recording, the ritual process is nearly identical to the creation of Hungry Sister. Except rather than engage in mutual 69 feeding, the victim's limbs are removed and the stumps are connected to one another. And then the artificial embrace begins. The implication being Beckett's severed arm stumps and leg stumps were to be conjoined to Verona's own stumps after he assumedly cuts off or otherwise removes his own limbs with Sanguinus, thus beginning the foul symbiosis that results in Beckett becoming a choir boy. Verona was even successful a number of times, though, as I mentioned before, nobody has ever actually seen these choir boys in person. And that's because, if you haven't already figured it out, the newly created choir boy, the blood brother, is absorbed into Dr. Verona himself. Dr. Verona is both blood brother and circle. He is one embrace, spread across multiple minds and bodies, yet contained in a single body. All of those hundreds of victims that fell to the serial killer's knife, both living and dead, were nothing more than attempts at replication. Yet only kindred ever survived the process, and so Verona became a master at kidnapping and experimenting on vampires themselves. All of this done in a process that, rather terrifyingly, according to Beckett, isn't too dissimilar from the creation of the gargoyle bloodline. Perhaps, if given enough time and vampires, Dr. Verona might have become the founder of a proper bloodline of a clan of Frankensteins that, well, never was, nor never will be. Thanks, V5. For a time, the evidence that we have discussed was pretty much all the evidence we had regarding the Blood Brothers' creation and identity. But before we discuss the evidence and answer the question, when is the Samiti video, what are the Blood Brothers and how are they created, Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition was released in 2011. And a couple of years after that, in 2014, a supplement for V20 was released known as Rites of the Blood, which is a supplement outlining the many blood rituals and thaumaturgies that existed at the time of V20 throughout the entire game, in addition to uncovering rituals that had yet to be revealed to the world. And of course, one of those rituals outlines the creation of a circle of blood brothers, and the ritual itself is known as Mirror of Blood. It's unclear if Mirror of Blood is the founding ritual that enacted the first Blood Brothers ritual, or if it's just the one that survived throughout history. But I'm just gonna put it plainly. Somehow Mirror of Blood is arguably worse than every other process we've discussed up to this point. I would rather become absorbed into Dr. Verona. I would rather be forced to eat the blood of 10 to 12 humans per night as a hungry sister, or be a motherfucker named Jerry in circle number 7, than be a victim of Mirror of Blood. It's so extreme that those extreme few vampires who know of it refuse to replicate the ritual due to the sheer blasphemy of it. Others don't perform this ritual because it's just too inconvenient. Mirror of Blood is a 5-dot ritual that involves capturing up to 10 children, less than 7 years old, all of which share a blood type and have no disease nor genetic imperfection. All of these children are ghouled, the same vampire, and then subjected to 3 months of torture by way of flesh sculpting and mental conditioning that results in every child resembling one another. The conditioning is so horrific that by the end of the 3rd month, every victim's mind is completely deteriorated or broken to a point that, they develop levels of Stockholm syndrome so potent towards their dominator, the vampire that ghouled them, that they no longer possess any self-preservation. But simply put, the children are subjected to ritual torture that conditions them to see their dominator, the one that made them a ghoul, as their only guardian figure, the only figure that exists at all. And then comes the tricky part. After this conditioning is complete and the children's minds have become one, they are given the task with killing the very vampire that ghouled them in the first place, thus ending their ghoul status and forcing the children to go through the withdrawal of losing vitae, a process which most humans don't even survive. Yet, should any of the children survive, the resulting trauma causes them, their minds forever warped, to seek protection and guardianship among no one else but each other. The children, essentially, by way of torture and flesh sculpting and conditioning, form a circle without being blood brothers. This pseudo-circle is then taken, killed, and put through a final series of incredibly difficult ritual rolls that, when successful, artificially re-embraces the child into a blood brother. More than 3 of the children need to survive the re-embrace for this process to work successfully. If only 1 or 2 survives, they all ultimately perish. Every vampire that partakes in this foul process loses some of their humanity in the process, not just because of the sheer depravity of Mirror of Blood requires to perform, but also because that vampire is reminded that this Mirror of Blood ritual took centuries of attempts to refine and master with only ever limited success. In other words, the vast majority of blood brothers that were ever attempted or successfully created were children. Maybe V5 was right after all. Maybe we don't need the blood brothers. So, what are the blood brothers? In a literal sense, I believe the blood brothers are a form of pseudo-vampire. They lie somewhere between ghoul and fully fledged kindred. But at their core, blood brothers are the results of hubris. They were born of a wish to subvert an already unnatural order. They were an incarnation of... They're from a Hellblazer comic. That's it. They're from someone saw them in the 1980s, like Hellblazer Volume 6. Someone found it on Reddit. Someone thought it was cool, and then they turned it into a vampire. That's what the blood brothers are. They're from a Hellblazer comic. Pack it up. I just wasted your time. Fuck you.